Welcome back, everybody. We spoke about cloud practitioner exams, and we're going through the various domains. Domain 1, cloud concept. Domain 2, security and compliance. Domain 3, cloud technologies and services. That has the most weight. 34% of your exam will be based on this. Now, I'm going to cover this. There's quite a number of technologies that we will cover, so I want to get started with it and not waste your time. I know a lot of the sessions out on YouTube is quite long. It's time consuming. I do these sessions with a very short amount of time, just so that you can get enough to pass your exam. So we are looking at all these services that's at the bottom: networking, compute, storage, databases, containers, messaging services, other in-scope services. This you'll find on the CLF02, which is the AWS guideline for this exam. So we'll cover first, we'll maybe look at networking. And on networking, what do I need to know? What are the technologies that they will speak to me about? Definitely, I will need to know my VPC. So I'll have to set up a VPC. Once I got a VPC set up, and in AWS, there is a CIDR range for your VPC, your CIDR blocks, classless interdomain routing, and that is from a /16, which is your 65,000 addresses, and it can only go up to a /28. And this is, if we have to talk about it, it is because of subnets. Right now, what you do is you subdivide your network into smaller sections, subnetting them into private and public subnets. And there's a whole session on networking, which is making quite a nice amount of views online. There's your public and your private subnets. And those public and private subnets is, for instance, if you have a /16, what you will do is you will take that and you subdivide that IP range in there as well. Now, one of the things you need to know as well is that there is 5 IP addresses, not 15. No, it is 5 IP addresses that is reserved by AWS. So you have 5 IP addresses that is reserved by AWS. You can't use them at all. They are .0, they are .1, they are .2, they are .3, and they are .255. Those are the IP addresses that you can't use within AWS. They're reserved for AWS themselves. So there is my CIDR blocks, and we're just talking about networking. We will cover the other technologies as well. So I've subnetted my environment. You probably also would want the internet gateway. Probably you'll see the IGW more than you'll see the term written out, internet gateways. So I need an IGW. This allows my EC2 instances to be able to via routes. So we will set up route tables, and those route tables will be attached to my subnet. And on that VPC, that is where I will have that IGW, the internet gateway, that with the route, and typically the route will be something like 0.0.0.0/0 going to the IGW or the internet gateway. That makes that subnet, it makes it immediately a public subnet by having that route table entry in there. Other things that you also need to know about routing is, for instance, there are certain things like a NAT gateway. So there is a NAT gateway, and this is for devices, again, that sits in your private subnets. Now, let me maybe just change the colors. For devices in a private subnet, you'll have a route on that private subnet that will say something different, though. It will say 0.0.0.0/0, send it to the NAT gateway. And it will then send it to that NAT gateway. And the NAT gateway, which lives in your public subnet, will then send it via this route to the internet via the internet gateway. You'll also need to know that there are services like Elastic IP address, Elastic network interfaces. Those devices you can use as well. Elastic IP address, Elastic network interfaces, and those devices you can use to move IP addresses from the one device to another device, move MAC addresses from the one device to the other device. So that is very quickly, very in small details, what you'll need to know about networking just to get started with your CPE exam. What are the other techs that we'll need to look at as well? Definitely the big one is, hey, you know what? Let's go back to networking, because there's a different section about networking that we can talk about as well. That section is when we start talking about your wider area network. So to maybe join with AWS, you could use a VPN, and you can create a VPN connection between your on-premises and AWS. It has a line speed of 250 1.25 gigabits per second line that you can have with that. Then there is also, if a VPN is too slow, you can go with the direct connect as another option for you as well. So you could go with the direct connect and set up a direct connect line between you, and now you can have 1 gigabits per second. You could have 10 gigabits per second. Some countries 100 gigabits per second, and I have seen recently 400 gigabits per second as well. If I've got multiple VPCs that I need to interconnect with each other, and I probably will create a different whiteboard on this specifically, I can do VPC peering, and I can create peering connections between two VPCs. Now, just on peering connections, just be careful. There is definitely some questions and some gotchas on this. For instance, if that is one VPC, there's another VPC, there's another VPC, and if I want those VPCs to see each other, I could go and I'll set up a peering connection. So we create, maybe with this color, a peering connection. And I'll create between that one as well another peering connection. So let's say I've got VPC A, VPC B, and VPC C, and I can then go and create those peering connections between these so that VPC A is able to connect up to VPC B. VPC B is able to connect up to VPC C via this peering connection that you establish. Now, one thing about these peering connections is the fact that you can't have transitive peering or transitive traffic. This means that VPC A can't get to VPC C. We just change that color. VPC A can't get to VPC C. You can't have that. That is called a transitive network, and it doesn't allow that. If I want VPC A to see VPC C, what I'll need to do is, yes, you guessed it, I need to go and create another peering connection. And then via that peering connection, I'm able to go and create this for those two to be able to connect and VPC A to see VPC C. So that's on VPC peering. And then there is also one of the other technologies that's really quite exciting, and that is transitive gateways. Transitive, let me just maybe spell a bit better. Transitive or transit gateways. Let me change that like that. Yep. And just write it properly. Yep. There we go. Let's make it a transit gateway. So you can set up a transit gateway as well, which is a lot more efficient than setting up peering connections. And I can do a transit gateway. What that means is if I've got multiple VPCs like we just saw, so there's VPC 1, there's VPC 1, there's VPC 2, there's VPC 3, there's VPC 4, multiple VPCs. We create one transit network, and then using services, a service called an attachment, we're able to go and connect all of those up to that transitive gateway. And then via routing, we are able to go and say, so we'll set up routing tables, and they're able to connect via these attachments. So that's on networking. That is very important. You'll need to know these concepts. There is a video on this. I'll create another one on your wider networks as well. Now let's go to compute. Compute, there is a huge section on compute that we can speak to. So let's go through what you'll need to know. You will need to know that if I'm talking about EC2, that there are different types of families of EC2 instance. You get your general purpose ones. You also then get your compute optimize. You get your memory optimize. And kind of how you need to remember this is that I've got a lot more CPU. I've got a lot more memory. This is a balance between CPU and memory. Then you have your accelerated computing as well. So this is in areas where you maybe want to do some 3D modeling. So you need this massive amount of computing power. Maybe you need another graphical processing unit in play as well. So that is definitely what will work for you. Accelerated computing. You get storage optimized. And then you also get You'll find this on AWS's website. These is HPCs, which is your high performance computing, your massive amount of computing power that you'll need. You will need to know this. Right. So that is on EC2 compute. They will talk about instance types. They will talk about the families that you have with EC2s. There is also the attributes. Now, many times, if you look at an EC2 instance, it could say something like a M6D 2 extra large. And what that D would, for instance, be would be an attribute. And that D means that it has a lot of storage. And it has a certain type of storage, which is called instance storage, instance store, as AWS calls them. So there's that, and you get maybe N for network optimized, you get G for graviton processor, that it has multiple different attributes that you have with these EC2 instances as well. Now, there are multiple other EC2 instances that you need to look at as well. There is on the instance types, there are over 780 plus different types of EC2 instances that you can select from, different operating systems as well, and you will select them via Amazon Machine Image or an AMI. And this you'll need to know as well, the fact that there is services that you can use to create AMIs, to duplicate AMIs, to back them up as well. You can go to the market store and purchase them. You can create your own, or you can use the quick starts as well that AWS has on their compute section as well. So this speaks to some areas. I want to go back and speak a bit more about compute, because there are some other computing sections that we can speak about as well. There is your containers. So you can have containerized environments within AWS. You have the old VMs that you can work with. There's some licensing issues at the moment, so just be careful about that. AWS definitely speaks about these following two containerized services. The one is ECS, or your Elastic Container Service. The other one is EKS, your Elastic Kubernetes Service as well. So maybe for your Docker containers, your ECS will work, and then for your Kubernetes environment, this one will work as well, or they just refer to it as K8. That will work as well. These are your orchestration tools that you will use with compute as well. Now, while I'm at this, it's good to mention that on compute, especially if we're talking about a containerized environment, there is a third way. Now, what I need to tell you is that with your ECS and EKS, you could go and set up, for instance, if I've got an EKS environment, I could go and create my node groups. And what my node groups will entail will be all of my nodes. And what is my nodes? My nodes are a whole lot of EC2 instances that my pods will run on. So I need to provision those EC2 instances for my pods to run on, or for my containers to run on. Now, what you do is you have a serverless way to do this as well, and that serverless way is called Fargate. The Fargate is a serverless way to get, if I've got a pod and that pod needs to be instantiated, there's my pod, it needs to be run. What happens is Fargate goes and it creates a very optimized environment for you to launch that pod in, and you can run that until you don't need it anymore, and then it just disappears. It goes and it is gone. So those are your containerized environments that you need to look at. And then there's others as well that you will probably need to know. The ones would be, and this will not be container-based, but you still get Elastic Beanstalk. And I see this as a good and easy way to stand up environments. You need to go and select your runtime. So once you select your runtime environment, you can go and Elastic Beanstalk will instantiate that environment for you. And then there's also Lightsail as well, which also gets used by companies, maybe if you want to set up WordPress or something like that. So they will do that in that regard as well. So that's on compute. I want to go and speak about two other services that's still under compute. If you go to your EC2 section, you will actually find that right at the bottom of EC2. Yes, I spent so much time there. I know where it is. You will have two services that appears there. The one is your load balancers. And in my load balancers, I will have my application load balancer. I'll have a network load balancer. I will have a gateway load balancer. And then there's also the classic load balancer, the old classic EC2 instances. This one doesn't get used that much anymore. It is for classic EC2 instances. Your application load balancer is feature rich. There's a lot of features to that. Which one do I use? If I want speed, I will use a network load balancer because it sits on layer 4 of the OSI. This one sits on layer 7 of the OSI as well. And then between internal services within AWS, I can use a gateway load balancer. That's all my load balancers. Another service that comes in regularly that you will find with your EC2 instances is your auto scaling. So you have auto scaling as well, and it is really a brilliant service to use within the environment. You create an auto scaling group, and that auto scaling group will have the minimum, the maximum, and the desired amount of EC2 instances when there is an event and it needs to scale. So minimum could be 1, desired could be 2, and your maximum could be 4 EC2 instances. So it will hit that 4 and it won't add any more EC2 instance for you. I will do another clip on auto scaling and load balancing separately and show you how high availability will work with these two services as well. That is on compute. There are other services that we can speak about as well. And there is storage. There is an actual video that you can look at on storage where we talk about the different types of storage that you have available. You have your EBS, Elastic Block Store, and they will have the snapshots, which is the incremental backups. You have EFS, and this is if I have maybe multiple EC2 instances, or maybe even if we're looking at container services, I could have an EKS environment with multiple pods, and they all need to connect up to a file system that runs over multiple AZs. So if you've got multiple AZs, they can run there. Remember, with your Elastic Block Store, what you typically will have is one AZ and one EC2 instance. Now, I do make mention in the other clip that I do is that you also get multi-attached EBS volumes as well that you can use to attach to multiple EC2 instances. But generally, it is one AZ and one EC2 instance, even multi-attach. It works in one availability zone as well. And then the big one that everybody loves to talk about that is really feature rich, which is S3, and that is your object storage. Giving you the services that you will need for your exams. And these they are, and what I have done is I've targeted specific whiteboards on these services because I know they will come in on the exams for you. So that is on the storage level where we can look at. And then I want to cover the other service as well, the next one, which is databases. Now, with databases, there are a couple of things that you need to remember. Databases, definitely, what I'll need to know is that the major two that they'll speak about is your relational databases. And the relational databases has 7 engines in the service that they call RDS, Relational Database Service. Quite easy. Now, the engines are as follows. They are your MS SQL server, very popular. There is Oracle. There is MySQL, one of my favorites. There is Postgres. There is MariaDB. There is the very cloud native one, which is Aurora, created for the cloud by AWS. And then there's a new one that they introduced recently, which is DB2. Got added not too long ago. So those are the 7 engines that you'll need to know. Other things about databases that you'll need to know as well is DMS. That is, write this out over there, your database migration service. And then a service that works with that is your schema conversion tool as well. So those two services, if you want to go and migrate your database. Um, this one, when you create it, you create your EC2 instance, you create your use pointer to the target or the source, and then the target where it needs to go to, and it can do a one-time, or it can do continuous replication for you as well. So that's your DMS service that can do that for you. Um, there are your non-relational databases as well. And the major one that is really performant, which is DynamoDB. I know the list that they looked at this year for their Prime Day, it did something like 126 million, what's a billion requests per second. It is extremely massive, right? At a click, it did 126 million requests. So it is extremely performant. Then there are additional database services as well. I'll just make them other. And for the others that you have out there, you have things like Neptune for your time series. You have Redshift. You have Elasticache for your caching service. You also have MemoryDB using Mongo. Then you have DocumentDB. And then you also have TimeStream as well. QLDB, I do see some notes that they are making this end of life as well. So that's on the database services that you will need to target for your exams too. So those are the different database services, and then we can run straight into containers. I just touched that during my EC2 section. EKS, ECS, Fargate, those are the services that you need to work with. Messaging services. Now, these are nice as well because there is a lot of questions that will come up, and that's why I created a special whiteboard for them. It is your SQS, simple queuing service, SNS, simple notification service. You will need to know those services. You will also need to know Kinesis, and then there is also Kafka that AWS has now up and running as well. So those are your messaging services that you will need to look at for your exams as well. Especially at the bottom one, you'll need to know Kinesis. You'll need to know the different types of Kinesis. There is Kinesis data stream, which there's Kinesis FiOS. The one Kinesis data stream, which is real time. Firehose is near real time because you can do things like buffering in there as well. You need to know these concepts as well. We've covered quite a bit with these sessions. I also then, during this one, let me go pull this one up, talk about other in-scope services that you need to know as well. There is EventBridge as well, which is really great. Works well for event-driven systems or architectures. There is simple emailing service. There's your CI for continuous integration, CI/CD, continuous deployment, where you have multiple different services like the code pipeline. They will still make mention of code commit. It's a service that I see they may be sunsetting. There is code build, and then there is code deploy. All these services that you will use in a CI/CD pipeline. There are other services as well where they could be talking about workspaces. I used to work quite often with this service, workspaces, and this is your streaming services where you may have a Windows environment that you're streaming into and working with that. There's IoTs as well that you can work with. There's Glue, your ETL services, extract, transform, and load services. Glue, really, it's a fantastic service. There's quite a bit on that. There is Athena. Now, what Athena will do for you is it is a querying service, right? And what it will query is objects in a S3. So without the data leaving S3, it's able to query on top the data or the objects in S3. And what works really well with this as well is Athena and Glue works well together, because if I've got an object and that object could be a CSV file, Glue could go and give me the structure, the schema of that file, and then that schema I can use to query the data in that specific object as well. There is also QuickSights, which is a BI tool. I delve in this area very often as well with customers. I speak to them about this service too. So there's QuickSights as well as a service. And I've seen recently that they've now also said that you need to have an understanding of AI and ML as well, machine learning. And the service with machine learning is SageMaker, which is quite a cool service to do some inference on. I've played around with that service quite a bit as well in my past. So it's really quite cool that there are these in-scope services that could be in your exam as well. Now that I've taken off their documentation as well. So I need to make you aware. I was quite surprised about the artificial intelligence, machine learning, that there is an understanding of that is required as well. This is a session on the concept, the technologies, the cloud technologies, services that you'll need to know. Massive amount of points on this one. So it is good if you can make sure that you cover all of that 34% cloud technologies and services that you'll need to know and think about, and make sure you do the work. It's brilliant. I hope that you pass your exams. And again, I'll do another session on billing, pricing, and support, which I think is also important, because there is some quick points that you can get out of that one. With that being said, domain 3 done. Those are texts that you need to look at and services that you need to look at, making sure that you get to pass your exam. Good luck. Bye.